The snow was falling softly across Winterfell, but inside the great hall, the air was thick with quiet tension. Arya stood in the shadows, her eyes never leaving her sister. Sansa sat on the high seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, face cold as polished ice. They had ruled in uneasy peace since Bran had been named king in the south. A boy who barely spoke, a boy of visions but no voice, no justice, no fire. Daenerys was alive. Whispers told of her death in the ruins of King's Landing, stabbed by Jon Snow. But whispers lie. Arya had seen her with her own eyes, broken, burned, but breathing, hidden in the mountains beyond Dragonstone, nursing wounds of fire and betrayal. The world had turned its back on her, and now she was done waiting for justice. Arya had gone to her in secret, slipped through the ashes of the fallen Red Keep like a shadow. She found Daenerys not as a queen, but as a woman stripped of her glory. Yet something deeper burned in her now. Not madness, not vengeance, purpose. They crowned your brother, Arya had told her, eyes dark. They said you were mad, but the world's always called women mad when they speak with fire. Daenerys hadn't spoken at first, just stared into the flames. But that night she rose. Then let's give them something to fear. Back in Winterfell, Sansa knew something had changed the moment Arya returned. She was quieter than usual. She watched the ravens more closely, and she no longer hid her blade. It wasn't long before Sansa got the letter, scrawled in Valyrian, sealed with black wax. A single line: the throne was built on the bones of women. It's time we take it back. She burned the letter after reading it. Sansa had never trusted Daenerys. The Dragon Queen had always been too wild, too unpredictable, too dangerous. But Sansa also knew the truth. Power in Westeros had always been a game played by men, with women as pieces. Queens married off, sisters sold, mothers killed in silence. She was done being a piece. Arya came to her chambers that night, her face hard as steel. You're either with us or against us. Sansa didn't answer right away. She poured wine, sat down, and stared into her sister's face. And what happens when we win? She asked. Arya leaned in, her voice low. Then the real game begins. Far to the south, in the crumbled ruins of King's Landing, a black dragon circled the skies. Drogon had returned. No one saw him come, not until the fires began again. Quiet burns in the night. Lannister outposts turned to ash. Gold cloaks found melted into their own armor. Panic spread like wildfire, but there was no banner, no declaration. Just fire and death. The realm began to whisper, "The Dragon Queen lives." Bran said nothing. Sat silent on his throne in the Red Keep's rebuilt hall, eyes distant as stars. Jon Snow had returned to the north, exiled by his own hand. Guilt ate him alive. He didn't know what he had spared or doomed by stabbing Daenerys. He drank more now, fought less. And when the letters started arriving in Winterfell, he didn't open them, but the three women did. Arya, Sansa, Daenerys. They weren't queens by name, not yet, but they were done playing the game by the rules of men. The raven flew, under the cover of a storm, cold wings cutting through frostbitten winds as it soared south toward King's Landing. But no raven sent from Winterfell that night carried a royal seal. It bore something far more dangerous, a silent message that said the North would no longer kneel. Sansa had made her decision. She would not bow to Bran's throne, nor any man's. Not anymore. The North had bled too much, and the scars of its women had never been counted. Sansa had survived Ramsay. She had survived Joffrey. And she had watched Daenerys burn a city, only to be slain by a man the realm still called honorable. Sansa had learned the truth in pain. In Westeros, peace was a story men told themselves while women were sold, silenced, or slaughtered. So now, she would write a different story. Arya had already begun. She vanished from Winterfell a week before the first fire lit in the Riverlands. A Lannister garrison, loyal to the throne, had tried to impose new taxes on the region. Golden grain, they said, for the good of the realm. What they didn't expect was a blade in the night and a sigil carved into the chest of their commander. A wolf, a dragon, and a flame. The rebellion didn't announce itself with armies. It bled into Westeros like a slow poison. The Reach saw its grain silos burn to the ground. The Vale lost its spies in sudden silent deaths. Dawn, ever quiet and watching, received a visitor with silver hair and a promise of power. Not from a man who would demand obedience, but from a queen who offered vengeance for the Sand Snakes, for Elia Martell, for every southern daughter ever betrayed by the crown. Meanwhile, Daenerys walked again, not as the Mad Queen, not yet as a ruler, but as a woman who had survived fire and death and returned colder than the snows beyond the wall. Her scars ran deep across her back, her ribs, her spirit. Drogon had kept her alive, hidden her in the mountains, fed her in silence while the world forgot her name. But she hadn't forgotten. Not Jon, not Tyrion, not the people who knelt when it was convenient and turned the moment fire touched their doors. She would not forgive. Varys had once said she would be the breaker of chains. Now, she would be the breaker of kings. Tyrion heard the rumors first in the small council. Soft whispers from merchants, hushed voices from brothels and soldiers alike. She's alive. The Dragon Queen lives. Winterfell is hoarding weapons again. Arya Stark was seen on the road to Harrenhal. No guards, just blood. The Dornish are quiet. Too quiet, Bran said nothing. He never did. Sat there, eyes distant, like he was watching a different war, one the others couldn't see. Some said he saw the future, but no one asked if he saw his own fall. So Davos pressed harder. If she's alive, we need to act now. Before the fires start again. Tyrion just stared at his cup. She never needed much to burn a city. What do you think she'll do with nothing left to lose? Jon Snow sat in the shadows of the Godswood in Winterfell, trying not to feel the shift. But even he could hear it. The way the guards whispered when Arya disappeared again. The way Sansa walked taller, colder. The way the snow fell heavier now, like the gods themselves were waiting. He hadn't spoken Daenerys' name in a year. He couldn't. Her eyes still haunted him. Not the madness, the betrayal. She had trusted him. And he had buried his dagger in her heart. Now he dreamed of fire. Every night. Fire and wings and her voice whispering, "You said you loved me." He did. And he feared she'd come to make him prove it. Back in the mountains, Daenerys stood before a firelit cave. Drogon curled behind her, half asleep, still protective. But in front of her knelt three new figures. A northern scout, a Dornish noble, and a Riverland's widow whose sons had died wearing Baratheon colors. They swore no oaths. Daenerys asked for none. She only said, "When we rise, no banners, no mercy. The Game of Thrones ends with us." Behind her, Arya stepped from the shadows, cloak dusted in ash, blade still wet. She nodded. The rebellion had begun. King's Landing was quiet. Too quiet. The small council had grown restless. Even Grey Worm, who once followed orders like a blade in a sheath, now stood taller in the war room, more wary, not of enemies at the gate, but of the silence between breaths. Something was moving. Something that didn't show up on maps. Lord Bronn of the Blackwater muttered it first, grinning over a goblet of Dornish red. "Feels like the calm before someone lights a match, don't it?" Tyrion didn't smile. He looked at the flames licking the hearth and thought about fire, thought about her. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in months, not since Jon Snow killed her, not since Drogon vanished into the clouds. But her absence had never felt real. It felt temporary, like the sky holding its breath before a storm. Then came the news, not from a raven, but from a man who stumbled into the Red Keep with third-degree burns down his arms, screaming about dragons in the Riverlands. Drogon alive, seen above Blackbuckle Creek, a full company of Lannister soldiers found melted in their armor. No survivors? The whispers stopped. Now they screamed. The Queen was alive. Far away, Daenerys sat in a circle of smoke and salt, listening to the Riverlords speak in half-choked voices of loyalty. She didn't need their oaths. She needed their fear. She saw it in their eyes. The kind of awe that came not from love, but from knowing someone had walked into death and come back with a dragon. They called her a ghost, a fury, a storm reborn. She let them. Daenerys had stopped trying to be loved. Arya, ever the silent blade, moved through the camps like a shadow. No one knew when she arrived or left, only that leaders who once hesitated to join the cause were suddenly buried or burning. She didn't speak often, not unless it mattered. "They still think in crowns and thrones," she told Daenerys once after removing a minor lord from the game. "But we're not playing anymore. We're finishing it." Daenerys didn't answer, but the smile that flickered on her lips, that slow, bitter curl, said enough. That slow, bitter curl said enough. In Winterfell, Sansa moved her pieces with precision. She met with old bannermen who still remembered the Red Wedding. She whispered into the ears of northern lords whose daughters had vanished into southern beds. She didn't shout or threaten. She reminded them what the South had done to the North, what kings had done to queens. When Jon Snow came to her concerned, his voice was tired, not just from battle, but from something deeper. Guilt. "This path you're on. It feels like vengeance," Sansa looked up from her maps. Her voice was steady. "And what path were you on when you killed Daenerys?" Jon flinched. Sansa's gaze didn't soften. "We all carry sins, Jon. The question is whether we let them drown us, or sharpen them into swords. You're speaking like Cersei." She stood slowly. "No, I'm speaking like a woman who's seen the cost of mercy." He left without answering. That night a raven flew from Winterfell, not to King's Landing, but to the Vale. Sansa's old ties to Littlefinger's former spies were not forgotten. She intended to use them. Bran Stark, King of the Six Kingdoms, stared into nothing. In truth, he saw everything. The North's silence, the fires blooming along the southern roads, Drogon's wings casting shadows over forgotten towers. He saw Arya's blade kiss throats in the dark, saw Daenerys rise from ash, not broken, but reborn, saw Sansa building alliances behind cold smiles. He didn't call for war, not yet, because in the river of time he now floated through, there was one thread he couldn't see clearly, a choice not yet made. Jon Snow, half Targaryen, half Stark, the traitor, the kinslayer, the only man alive who had held both women in his arms and betrayed them both. Would he side with the throne or with the queens? Somewhere south of Harrenhal, Arya stood in a ruined barn, wiping blood from her blade. A girl had begged her for mercy, the daughter of a lord who'd funded Lannister blades. Arya had offered her the same thing Westeros had always offered the Starks: silence. She looked up to see Daenerys watching her from the doorway. Silent and calm. "She was just a girl," the Dragon Queen said. Arya didn't blink. "So was I." For a long time, neither of them said anything. Then Daenerys turned to the door. "We march in 3 days." Arya followed without a word. The Queen's rebellion had no anthem, no banners, no crown. But across Westeros the wind began to shift. The fire had returned, and it had 3 heads now. It started with the bells. Not in King's Landing. This time, it was in Fairmarket, a sleepy trade town along the riverlands that once thrived under the Tullys. The bells rang out not for warning, but for confusion. People stepped into the streets expecting a wedding or a feast. Instead, they saw fire on the horizon. By nightfall, the banners of House Lannister were torn from the gates, not by a siege, but from within. The garrison commander, a well-fed knight with a gambling debt, had opened the gates after receiving a single letter sealed with black wax and no sigil. No one knew what was in it. But the next morning, his head was found resting on the steps of the market square, burned, eyes melted shut. No one claimed responsibility. Not publicly, but every soldier who saw Drogon's shadow stretch across the fields didn't need an explanation. Far to the north, Jon Snow rode alone through the frost-bitten valleys between Winterfell and the Neck, his thoughts heavier than his sword. The road was too quiet, and he was too used to war to believe in peace anymore. He had received word. Not from Sansa, not from Bran, but from Samwell Tarly, a raven with 6 words. "She's alive. And she's not waiting." Jon didn't want to believe it. He had watched her die. He had held her as the life slipped out of her. He had seen Drogon scream into the sky and vanish into the clouds with her body in his claws. but part of him had never truly believed she was gone. A dragon queen doesn't die like that. Not without leaving something behind. He didn't know what he'd do if he saw her again. Apologize? Kneel? Fight? He only knew one thing. The world was shifting again. And this time, the storm was coming from the north and the south at once. Back in the Red Keep, Tyrion paced like a man trapped in a burning cage. He'd once played the game with wine and words, but now he felt like a child holding a sword too heavy to swing. 2 towns lost in the Riverlands, Ser Davos said grimly. A Dornish fleet spotted near Storm's End, and a raven just arrived from Harrenhal. Tyrion looked up. Well, what does it say? Davos hesitated. It wasn't addressed to the crown. It was addressed to Sansa Stark. Tyrion didn't move, but something in his face cracked. A shift, small and tired. Of course it was. Varys had once told him that power resides where men believe it does. Now, he realized, the realm didn't believe in kings anymore. It believed in the fire of women scorned. At Harrenhal, Daenerys stood before the shattered black stone, looking at what once had been a castle and now stood as a graveyard of kings. This place has seen too many tyrants, she said softly. Fingers brushing the scorched stone, Arya stood beside her, watching the fog roll across the ruined courtyard. Then it's a good place to start tearing them down. Behind them, soldiers were gathering, quietly, carefully, not in banners and drums, but in whispers and code. Disillusioned knights, second sons, village women whose families had been slaughtered during the sack of King's Landing. They didn't kneel for titles. They followed fury. Daenerys looked over them, not as a queen, not as a savior, but as a weapon. They'll call us mad, Arya said. Daenerys gave a tired smile. Let them. Westeros never feared quiet women. Arya's voice was sharp. They will. Back in the Vale, Sansa sat across from Lord Royce, hands calm on the table between them. The room was cold, but her voice wasn't. You supported Jon once, she said. He was a Stark in name. A Targaryen in truth, Lord Royce nodded. And now? She leaned forward. Now you support the women who built him and were betrayed in return. Royce frowned. You mean to put Daenerys back on the throne? Sansa's voice didn't rise. I mean to end the throne, to build something better, and yes, that might mean fire. He didn't agree, not fully, but he didn't walk out either, which meant more than enough. By the time she left the Eyrie, 2,000 soldiers were marching south. They carried no lion, no stag, no dragon, but they followed the wolf. In the ruins of a nameless village near the Trident, Arya stood above a Lannister captain bound to a tree. His men had all fled or died. Only he remained. You don't have to do this, he spat. Arya tilted her head. You burned women alive at River Run. You strung up children who stole bread. I followed orders, she nodded. So did I. Then she slit his throat, quiet as the wind. From the edge of the woods, Daenerys watched. There was no pleasure in her face. Only resolve. They'll call us monsters, she said. Arya wiped her blade clean. Let them scream it from the ashes. The rebellion had stopped hiding. The fire was no longer in the shadows. Westeros was burning, not in chaos, but in purpose. And in King's Landing, Bran Stark finally blinked. For the first time in a year, he turned to the small council and spoke. Send word to Jon Snow, he said. Tell him the realm is not his to walk away from. The snow had turned red by the time Jon reached the Riverlands. He had traveled alone, without banners or guards, cloaked in furs and silence. No one recognized him at first, just another half-frozen rider at the edge of a war zone. But even in dirt and shadow, the face of a Stark carried weight. People whispered, doors opened, warnings were given, and they all spoke one name like a prayer and a curse. Daenerys. She's different now, a farmer warned him, wrapping his bleeding arm in linen. Doesn't speak much, doesn't ask, just burns and moves on. She's alive, Jon muttered, more to himself than anyone. The man blinked at him. Aye, more alive than most of us. He found her outside the ruins of Maidenpool, a city half burned, half standing, with smoke curling from its broken spires. Drogon perched like a black god on the cliffs above, watching every move. His golden eyes lit like molten coin. Jon dismounted slowly. He expected resistance. Swords. Shouts. At the very least, fire. What he got was Arya. She stepped from the tree line, her hood down, her face blank as always. "You came," she said flatly. "I needed to see her." Arya looked at him long and hard. "She might kill you," Jon's voice cracked. "Maybe I deserve it." "She wouldn't waste the fire," Arya replied, stepping aside. Daenerys stood alone in the middle of the ashes. Her silver hair tangled in the wind, her cloak lined in black and red. The sun dipped low, casting her in gold, like some vision half risen from the past. She didn't turn around when Jon approached. "You came to kill me again?" she asked, without anger. "Just fact," Jon swallowed hard. "No," she turned then. And for a moment he forgot how to speak. Her eyes were different now, not mad. "Not soft, just done. I saw the fires," he said quietly. "The soldiers you've burned, the banners you've torn down." Daenerys tilted her head. "And yet the throne still stands." Jon stepped closer. "This isn't justice." Jon stepped closer. "This isn't justice." "No," she said, "it's correction." She took a slow step forward. "They crowned my killer's brother. Said he was the wisest choice. A man who sees everything but says nothing. That's not a king. That's a witness." Jon looked at the ground. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were," she said, surprising him. "For you." Silence fell between them like a sword. "I loved you," Jon whispered. Daenerys' eyes didn't soften. "And you still chose the realm over me." Back in King's Landing, the council room had turned into a battlefield of words. "She's taking cities by the day," Bronn spat. "And you're sitting there like some dead tree." Bran didn't flinch. "Daenerys Targaryen is alive," Tyrion said softly. "And she's not the same woman we tried to contain before." "Then kill her!" Bronn shouted. "No," came the cold voice of Ser Davos. "That didn't work last time." They all turned to Bran. He simply said, "Send word to Storm's End. Lord Gendry owes us more than a title. And send word to Casterly Rock. If there's any gold left there, we'll need it." "And what of Jon Snow?" Tyrion asked. Bran's eyes closed. "He's already chosen." Meanwhile, Sansa met with the Lords of the Reach in a ruined chapel once held by Tyrells, the stone still stained with blood from battles long past. "They expect kings," she told them, voice calm. "Let them. While they gamble over crowns, we'll control the bread." It was brilliant. While Daenerys scorched the south and Arya turned spies to corpses, Sansa had taken the Reach without a single blade. She promised grain, protection, autonomy, not freedom, control, but wrapped in enough dignity to make it palatable. Lord Tarly's heir bowed to her without question. "You've learned the game well," said Lady Irena, a minor noble. Sansa just smiled. "I helped kill the last players." In Harrenhal, a raven arrived in the dead of night, its feathers soaked from rain. Arya read the letter and didn't blink. Then she stood, cleaned her blade, and disappeared. By morning, 2 spies were found dead, one in the river, one hanging from a tree. Daenerys didn't even ask who sent them. She just looked to the east and whispered, "It's time." Jon rode with them. Not because he was loyal, not because he had forgiven her, but because somewhere deep inside, he knew the realm would not survive what was coming, unless someone was there to stop it from collapsing into madness. And maybe, just maybe, he still believed in something. Not a queen, not a throne, but a reckoning. Want to continue with part 6? In it, the rebellion reaches King's Landing. Jon faces Bran, and Sansa makes a move that shocks even Daenerys. Let me know, and I'll continue. You said next stories. Writer by Amar said, what if Arya, Sansa, and Daenerys led a queen's rebellion against the throne? Part 6. The ashes of Crown's King's Landing had seen fire before, when wildfire roared through the sept of Baelor, when dragonflame fell from the sky in Daenerys' wrath, when the Red Keep crumbled under rage and betrayal. But this was different. This time, fire came not from chaos but purpose. The gates of the city didn't fall to armies or siege towers. They opened from the inside. It began with a single flicker. A bakery set ablaze in the heart of Flea Bottom, then a warehouse, then a barracks. Fire licked the sky while ravens scrambled to carry word to the throne. By dawn, Half the gold cloaks had vanished, bribed, threatened, or killed. The rest stood stunned, staring at smoke curling through the alleys like a living thing. No one said her name. They didn't have to. She was here. Inside the Red Keep, Tyrion stood at the high window, wine untouched, face pale. "It's happening again," he murmured. "Only this time she's not here to rule. She's here to end it." "Then stop her," Davos said grimly. Tyrion looked at him. "You don't stop a dragon. You survive it." Bran sat unmoving on his throne, eyes glazed in vision, watching flames dance across timelines, seeing paths that forked and bled. But none of them led to peace. "I warned them," he finally said. "A broken wheel doesn't fix itself." Sansa arrived in the city before the flames reached the Red Keep. She rode through the eastern gate under a cloak of Lannister red, a quiet trick that got her past loyalist checkpoints. But the moment she stepped into the city, she shed the cloak and raised her banner, a dire wolf, black on grey. The North had entered the city, not with horns and drums, but with blades in the dark and eyes in every alley. She took no throne. She claimed no title. Instead, she marched into the Sept of Baelor's ruins and gave a speech not to nobles, but to the people. "You were promised peace. You were given ashes. You were promised kings. But none of them fed you. None of them bled for you. The realm belongs not to lords, but to those who survived." By sunset, the people were chanting a new name in the streets. Not queen, not dragon, Lady of the North. Jon stood with Daenerys at the edge of the city. The wind stank of soot and rising chaos. "I don't want another war," he told her. She didn't look at him. "There was never peace. You burned it once. Now you'll burn it again." Her voice was quiet. "I gave them mercy once. They gave me death. This time I give them truth." He turned to her. "And what truth is that?" "That crowns are built on bones," she said, walking forward, "and I've run out of patience." Then, with a single command in Valyrian, Drogon shrieked into the sky. The rebellion had entered its final act. Tyrion found Bran alone in the godswood of the Red Keep, wheeled under the weirwood tree as flames cracked in the distance. "You knew this would happen," Tyrion said bitterly. "I saw 1,000 ways it could happen," Bran replied, "and one where it doesn't, but you've already made your choices." Tyrion paced. "She's going to tear down what little we've rebuilt." "No," Bran said. "She's going to force us to choose." Arya appeared like a ghost in the Red Keep, slipping through servant tunnels, emerging behind guards, blades flashing only when needed. She didn't speak. She didn't wait. She was looking for someone. And when she reached the royal quarters, she found them. A young Lannister cousin, placed in the city as a spy, groomed to eventually inherit power through blood and silence. He begged. She didn't listen. When she walked out of the room, her face was calm, her hands steady, her blade soaked in red. One less name on the list. Outside the gates of the keep, the people gathered, not by command, not from fear, but drawn like moths to fire. They watched as Daenerys stepped through the city alone, Drogon behind her, silent but waiting. Her silver hair gleamed in the firelight. Her eyes didn't blink. She stopped at the base of the Red Keep. "I will not be Queen of Bones," she shouted to the sky. "I will not be a puppet in another Game of Thrones. Today, we end the lie. No more kings, no more crowns." And then she looked to Jon. He stepped forward and drew his sword. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Arya reached for her dagger. Sansa froze atop the city wall, eyes wide. Daenerys didn't flinch. "If you want peace," she said softly, "you'll have to kill me again." Jon held his blade tight and let it fall. "I came to end the game, not you." Suddenly a horn blared from the east gate. A massive force, armored and sharp, rode into the city. Stark banners, veiled banners, even some from Dawn, all united under one sigil that none had seen before. A direwolf wrapped in dragon wings. Sansa had arrived, not to stop Daenerys, but to crown the moment. She walked to the front of the crowd and raised her hand. "The Age of Thrones is over," she declared. "From this day on, Westeros will not be ruled. It will be rebuilt, not by kings, not by queens, but by the survivors. And for the first time in the city's history, no one cheered a ruler. They cheered the end. 3 days passed. The flames had died down. The smoke thinned. The city still smelled like scorched stone and blood, but for once there were no soldiers fighting in the streets, no orders barked by tyrants, no cries for mercy echoing through alleys. Westeros had not been saved, but it had stopped bleeding. For now. Daenerys stood atop the steps of the Red Keep, what was left of them, where kings once pronounced justice and queens once died screaming. She looked down at the crowd, not with pride, but detachment. There were no banners, no crowns, no titles, just people. Watching her, waiting, the small folk called her the Ash Queen now, some with reverence, others with fear. Either way, they looked at her as if she held a blade to the future's throat. At her side stood Arya, silent as ever, watching the guards closely. She didn't trust any of them, not even the ones who called themselves reformed. Behind them, Jon Snow waited in the shadows, not because he wanted power, not because he belonged there, but because he didn't know where else to go anymore. In the Great Hall, still blackened from the last siege, a new council had been called, not to rule, but to decide what came next. Sansa sat at the head of the long table, not in a throne, but in a plain wooden chair. Her face was unreadable, her eyes colder than winter wind. Daenerys sat across from her. The two women hadn't spoken directly since the Red Keep fell. Arya stood behind them both, leaning against the wall like she was already planning her exit, or someone else's. Brienne of Tarth sat beside Sansa, weathered but still steel. Tyrion gaunt and weary beside Daenerys, and at the far end Bran, the boy who became king. Now watching it all unravel, Tyrion cleared his throat. "No king, no queen, no crown, that's what we said." Sansa's voice cut like ice. "We said we'd end the game. We didn't say how we'd build what comes after." Daenerys narrowed her eyes. "And what would you build, Lady Stark?" Daenerys narrowed her eyes. "And what would you build, Lady Stark?" Sansa met her gaze. Something that doesn't put power in the hands of one person. Something that listens, governs, endures. Arya scoffed from the wall. "Governed by who? Lords with gold and guilty hands. You want a council of clever men playing at peace?" Sansa snapped back. "No. I want a world where little girls don't grow up wondering which man will hurt them first." The silence after that was long, bitter and full of ghosts. Bran finally spoke. His voice distant. "Burn the throne. Melt the swords. Keep the council. Rotate the voice of power every 7 years. Everyone stared. "That's not a monarchy," Tyrion said. "No," Bran agreed. "It's not." "And who decides who speaks for the realm?" Daenerys asked, her tone sharp. Sansa answered before anyone else could. "The survivors. The broken. The ones who paid the highest price for the old system." Arya nodded faintly, just once. Jon spoke up for the first time. "And what about the people who followed? Who carried banners? Who fought not for thrones, but for the ones they believed in?" He didn't look at Daenerys, but she looked at him. Brienne leaned forward. "We give them a place, a role, but not a crown. No more crowns." Daenerys's fingers curled against the table. "So we take what was stolen, and we give it to strangers." Tyrion replied softly, "We give it to the realm. Isn't that what you wanted?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know anymore. That night, in the ruins of the old dragon pit, Arya met with Gendry. He hadn't come as a lord. He'd left Storm's End with a sword and no title. They hadn't spoken since the rebellion began. "I thought I'd see you wearing a crown by now," he said, half smiling. Arya shrugged. "You know I don't wear things that don't fit." They talked until the stars blinked awake. About the past, about the road, about what came next. "I'm leaving," Arya said finally. He blinked. "Now? I was never meant to sit in halls and argue about grain and banners. Sansa and Daenerys, they want to build something. I'm not a builder." He nodded slowly. "Where will you go?" "Where they've never heard of thrones," she said. "Where names don't matter." Then she kissed him. Brief, soft, final. Elsewhere in the city, someone else was leaving too. Jon stood alone in the Godswood, facing the old heart tree, whispering names he would never forget. Ghost sat beside him, quiet as the snow. Daenerys appeared behind him. "You're not staying," she said. "No," he replied. I don't belong in their world." "You never did," she said. He turned to her. "And you?" She looked out at the city. "I don't know who I am without fire." He almost reached for her, but instead he just said, "Goodbye, Dany." She didn't cry. She just turned and walked away. Back in the Great Hall, Sansa watched as the Iron Throne, or what remained of it, was dragged into the square. The blacksmiths melted it down under the eyes of the people, sword by sword. Chain by chain, the last king's seat reduced to molten metal, poured into a mold for something simpler, a bell, to be rung not in fear, but to call the council. When the time came to choose, again the sea was calm. The morning Arya left Westeros, her ship was small, no banners, no guards, just a crew who didn't ask names and didn't expect answers. She stood at the bow in a dark cloak, her hair pulled back, her blade tucked beneath her belt like an old truth no longer spoken. Sansa came to the dock at dawn. No ceremony, no final words prepared, just a sister watching her blood vanish into the mist. "You don't want to know where I'm going?" Arya asked. Sansa shook her head. "You wouldn't tell me," Arya smiled. "You finally learned." There was a long silence between them. Not awkward, just full. A shared history no one else could carry. "I never wanted a throne," Arya said quietly. "I know," Sansa whispered. "That's why I trust you." Then Arya stepped onto the ship, and for the first time since Ned Stark's death, she walked into a world untouched by thrones, banners, or blood feuds. She didn't look back. Jon Snow rode north past the broken castles, past the wall, past even the haunted trees of the old forest. No one followed. No one called him king or prince or traitor anymore. He didn't belong in Sansa's new world, didn't believe in Daenerys' fire, and no matter how many battles he fought, he'd never forgive himself or forget. Ghost ran beside him, tongue out, tail high. At least someone still believed. Jon didn't seek redemption, only silence, only peace. And in the deep wild beyond the wall, he hoped he'd find it. In King's Landing, Sansa stood at the top of the bell tower, the new symbol of Westeros. No throne, just a seat for the Speaker of the Realm. A new one chosen every 7 years. No bloodlines, no legacies, no crowns. It was slow, messy, awkward, but it worked. Brienne helped rebuild the city guard. Gendry reforged the melted blades of the Iron Throne into plows, bells, and tools. Tyrion remained at Sansa's side, not as hand, but as her equal. A voice among many, not a ruler. Just one more survivor trying to get it right. The lords grumbled. The old houses resisted. But they were tired. The people were tired, and for once they were being heard. Daenerys stayed, but she did not rule. She refused a seat on the council, refused titles. Even Drogon had flown east, vanishing into the unknown. Instead, she walked the ruined streets, healing, watching, building. Children followed her, calling her the Ghost Queen. She didn't smile, but she didn't burn them either. She never forgave the realm. She couldn't. But slowly, the fire inside her softened. One morning, she found herself planting flowers outside the ruins of the Septot Red Ones. Like the ones that once bloomed in Meereen, someone left a note beside her that day. "You're still a queen, just not of thrones." She never learned who wrote it. Maybe it was Jon, maybe it was Tyrion, maybe it was no one. But she didn't burn it. Bran disappeared. Some said he went beyond the wall. Some said he faded into the trees. Some said he died quietly. Content. But the truth was, he simply stopped being needed. When the wheel broke, so did his burden. He left behind no legacy, just a realm finally choosing for itself. Years later, stories were told of 3 women who ended the oldest game in Westeros. One with fire, one with silence, one with cold, quiet steel. Children learned their names like myths. Daenerys, the last dragon Arya, the blade in the dark Sansa, the wolf who chose to build. No one spoke of kings anymore, only survivors, only choices. And in the bell tower, when the new council met every 7 years, they rang the bell not for war, not for coronation, but to remind the realm, no more thrones, only voices, only people, only hope. Only people, only hope.